1969, the last year of a turbulent decade, a time when the world seemed to be standing at the edge of something entirely new, half in the past, half in the future. If you close your eyes, you can still feel it, the hum of change in the air, the color of hope on every horizon, and the quiet belief that humanity was about to do something extraordinary. The world in 1969 was alive in a way that's hard to describe now. You could feel the pulse of history beating in the rhythm of everyday life, through the crackle of a vinyl record, the glow of a television set, and the chatter of neighbors gathered on front porches. The streets smelled of gasoline and freedom. The sounds of the Beatles, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and Simon and Garfunkel floated out of car radios, filling the summer air with something that felt like possibility. But even as history was being written, life carried on in its familiar ways. Kids played in backyards, chasing fireflies under wide-open skies. Mothers hung laundry out to dry in the sunlight. Fathers read the evening paper with a look of quiet pride and curiosity about the world. Dinner was served at 6, the milk came in glass bottles, and every household had its own steady heartbeat, the comforting routine of ordinary days in extraordinary times. Television connected families like never before. You could sit in your living room, turn the dial and see the whole world. Protests, parades, astronauts and rock stars, all flickering in black and white, or, if you were lucky, in color. The news came faster, the music louder, and the world felt closer, smaller, more alive. There was a sense that everything was happening all at once, that the future wasn't coming someday. It was already here. In 1969, the cars were big, the dreams were bigger, and America was still holding on to its innocence, just barely. Men wore sideburns and wide ties, women wore bold prints and bright colors. The world was bursting with energy, optimism and rebellion all at the same time. You could walk down a city street and see businessmen in suits passing by college students with flowers in their hair. Generations clashed and connected under the same sky, each convinced that they were shaping what came next. If you were young, you felt it more than anyone. The world was yours to question, to challenge, to reinvent. You might have been marching for peace, sitting in a smoky coffeehouse listening to poetry, or blasting rock and roll through a transistor radio in your bedroom. You might have dreamed of California, or of the stars. There was a sense of urgency, like the clock was ticking and you were lucky enough to be alive in the middle of it all. The cities buzzed with motion, neon signs, bus engines, the smell of rain on pavement. But even in small towns where the pace was slower, the world was changing. New ideas, new music, new freedoms were reaching every corner. Through radio waves and television signals, through stories told over coffee in diners and on front steps. You could feel that something big was coming. No one knew exactly what, but everyone knew it was close. And yet, for all the noise and motion, life still had moments of perfect stillness. The sound of a screen door slamming in the summer heat. The soft whir of a fan turning in a quiet room, the laughter of children playing barefoot in the grass, the smell of freshly cut lawns mixing with cigarette smoke and perfume. There was a kind of beauty in the ordinary, even as the extraordinary loomed on the horizon. The 1960s had been a storm, a decade of change, conflict and awakening. But 1969 was its calm before the dawn, its grand finale, its moment of reckoning and wonder. People had seen war, protest, assassinations, and dreams deferred, but they had also seen courage, creativity, and connection on a scale the world had never known before. And as that summer began, something shifted, a sense that humanity, for all its flaws, was about to rise higher than it ever had before. It was a year of noise and silence, of chaos and clarity, of rebellion and reunion. It was a time when you could look up at the sky and, for the first time in human history, imagine someone up there. 1969 wasn't just another year. It was the end of one world and the beginning of another. The world was holding its breath. And in that pause, that quiet before history changed forever, life looked beautiful, ordinary, imperfect, fragile, and alive. Everyday life in 1969 was a blend of tradition and transformation. It was a world caught between black and white and color, between the comfort of the familiar and the thrill of the unknown. For all the headlines about war and protest, most people were just trying to live their lives, to raise families, to pay the bills, to make sense of the world spinning around them. The mornings began much like they had for decades. The sound of the radio filled kitchens across America, as newscasters talked about Vietnam and peace marches, while pop songs drifted through the static. Mothers packed lunches for their kids, fathers drank coffee and read the morning paper, and children ran down sidewalks to catch the school bus. You could still smell the faint scent of bacon frying, the rustle of newspapers, the clatter of dishes. The world might have been changing, but the rhythm of home stayed the same. In those homes, the television had become the new hearth. The family gathered around it not just for entertainment, but for connection, to see the world as it unfolded. The faces of Walter Cronkite and Chet Huntley were familiar, trusted, like members of the family. They told you about protests in Washington, about astronauts preparing for launch, about Woodstock, about everything. In 1969, information traveled fast, but not too fast. You still had time to process it, to sit quietly with what you'd just seen. Teenagers, of course, lived in their own universe. The music was their language, their rebellion, their freedom. Records spun in bedrooms across the country. The Beatles' Abbey Road, Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer, and Jimi Hendrix's guitar like lightning from another planet. Music wasn't just background noise. It was identity. You could tell who someone was by the patches on their denim jacket, by the way they wore their hair, by what song made their eyes light up. The world was finding its voice, and the youth were singing it. At school, things still looked tidy on the surface. Rows of desks, chalkboards, paper maps hanging on the walls. But underneath, the winds of change were blowing. The topics that had once been whispered were now being spoken out loud. Teachers talked about civil rights, about the environment, about the future. Kids were learning not just from books, but from the world outside. The conversation was shifting, and with it the generation. Out in the neighborhoods, life still had that small-town magic. The milkman made his rounds. Ice cream trucks rolled slowly down streets lined with elm trees. Children played with hula hoops, rode banana seat bikes, and tossed baseballs in empty lots. People waved to their neighbors, borrowed sugar, mowed their lawns in the afternoon sun. For all the noise of the world, there was still quiet beauty in these everyday rituals. They were anchors in a sea of change. Evenings carried their own kind of peace. Families gathered around the dinner table, roast chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes, the same way they always had. Maybe the talk turned to politics, maybe to the latest episode of Bewitched or Bonanza. The TV flickered in the next room, a warm glow that promised entertainment, not endless distraction. There was no scrolling, no notifications, just the hum of conversation, the laughter of people who loved each other, the comfort of being together. But 1969 wasn't all calm. You could feel the tension, even in small ways. The world was changing faster than some people could accept. Young people questioned everything: the war, the government, their parents' values. The generation gap was real. It played out in dinner table debates, in the length of a son's hair, in the music a daughter listened to behind her closed bedroom door. Yet beneath it all, there was love. Complicated, sometimes unspoken, but love nonetheless. Beyond the suburbs, the cities were alive with motion. Crowds filled the streets, some marching for peace, some for rights, some simply for the joy of being young and free. You could feel the electricity in the air, the sense that the world was being rewritten in real time. Murals appeared on brick walls, posters with bold colors and bolder messages. Cafes and college campuses buzzed with conversation. There was fear, yes, but also hope. And everywhere you went, there was the feeling that something was coming, something big. The newspapers spoke of it, the teachers hinted at it, the TV showed it. Rockets, astronauts, countdowns. The space race had turned into something far more human, a dream that belonged to everyone. People who had once looked up at the night sky and seen only stars were now wondering what it would feel like to walk among them. Even in the middle of all that anticipation, life went on. Weddings were planned, babies were born, groceries were bought. The extraordinary and the ordinary coexisted side by side, like two melodies that somehow played in harmony. That's what made 1969 so unique. It wasn't just about the history books. It was about the heartbeat of real life continuing in the background. If you lived through that year, You probably remember the feeling, that mix of excitement and uncertainty, fear and faith. You didn't know what the future would look like, but you believed in it. You believed that humanity could do something great. And as that summer approached, you could feel it in your bones. The sense that the world was about to take a single incredible step into the unknown. July 20th, 1969. It was the kind of summer day that seemed ordinary at first. Bright sunlight, children playing outside, the steady hum of cicadas in the heat. But deep down, everyone knew something extraordinary was about to happen. The television was on in nearly every living room, glowing softly like a beacon. The world wasn't just watching, it was waiting. In that moment, the noise of everyday life faded. Radios went quiet. Conversations paused. Across towns and cities, people leaned closer to their screens. Families gathered shoulder to shoulder on living room carpets, eyes fixed on that grainy black and white image transmitted from 250,000 miles away. It didn't matter where you were, a farmhouse in Kansas, a high-rise in New York, or a small apartment in London. We were all looking at the same moon. And then, through the static, a voice came across the airwaves. Calm, steady, and human. That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. And then it exhaled. Tears, laughter, applause, a tidal wave of emotion that crossed borders, languages, and generations. It was the sound of humanity realizing what it had just done. We had left the earth, and somehow we had come home. That night, millions stepped outside and looked up at the moon, the same moon that poets had written about, that lovers had stared at, that children had dreamed under. And now, someone was standing there. It was almost too much to comprehend. You could feel it in the air, that mix of disbelief and pride. The impossible had become possible. In the days that followed, the newspapers were filled with headlines. The photographs, those ghostly footprints in the lunar dust, became icons overnight. Kids cut them out and taped them to their bedroom walls. Teachers brought them into classrooms. Parents saved them in scrapbooks. Everyone wanted to hold on to that moment, to capture the feeling of being united, even if just for a day, under the same dream. The moon landing wasn't just about technology, it was about humanity, about what happens when people dare to believe in something bigger than themselves. For one brief, beautiful moment, the world forgot its divisions. There was no us or them, there was only we. But the magic of 1969 didn't end on the moon. Back on Earth, the same spirit of discovery, rebellion, and hope was changing everything. That summer, 500,000 young people gathered on a muddy field in upstate New York. Woodstock, a festival that became a symbol of peace, music, and freedom. For 3 days it rained, it thundered, it sang. Guitars roared, voices rose, and strangers became family. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, chaotic, and real, just like the decade that had birthed it. But to those who were there, it felt like a glimpse of a better world. And so, in one summer, humanity looked both outward and inward, reaching for the stars while rediscovering its soul. On one side of the world, astronauts floated in silence above the Earth. On the other, barefoot dreamers danced in the mud. 2 moments that couldn't have been more different, yet somehow belonged to the same heartbeat of history. If you lived through 1969, you remember how everything felt new. Television sets glowed brighter, music sounded deeper. Even the air felt charged, as if the world itself had taken a breath and was holding it, unsure what would happen next. The word change no longer felt abstract. It was everywhere. You could see it in fashion, in politics, in art, in the way people spoke to one another. The old world was fading, and something younger, louder, freer was taking its place. Still, not everyone was ready for it. Some longed for the quiet order of the 1950s, for a time that felt simpler. Others couldn't wait to leave the past behind. The country was split between those holding on and those letting go. Yet somehow in that moment of contradiction, there was connection. The moon, the music, the movement. It all reminded people that even when the world felt divided, it could still come together around something beautiful. And that was the paradox of 1969. It was a year of unity and unrest, of silence and noise, of awe and anxiety. The war still raged overseas. Protests filled the streets. Tragedies and triumphs existed side by side. But amid it all, there was a sense that humanity had turned a corner, that something inside us had changed. Maybe that's what made it so unforgettable. Because for one brief moment, in the middle of all that chaos, we proved to ourselves what we were capable of. We could reach beyond war and politics. We could build rockets, sing songs, dream dreams, and step foot on another world. 1969 was proof that the human spirit, despite everything, was still unstoppable. The world had changed, not just because we reached the moon, but because we'd seen what we could be when we dared to look up. Looking back now, it's hard to believe that so much could have happened in a single year. 1969 wasn't just a date on a calendar. It was a turning point in the story of humanity. The decade that had begun with quiet optimism and the echoes of post-war life ended in a burst of color, noise, and wonder. It was the moment the world looked at itself and realized it had changed forever. In many ways, the 1960s had been a storm, full of turbulence, protest, and transformation. But by its final year, that storm had cleared just enough for us to see what it had left behind, a generation that believed it could do anything, a generation that had seen the darkness of the world and still chose to chase the light. The moon landing was only part of it, the symbol of something deeper. Humanity had reached outward to the stars, but what we truly discovered was ourselves. Because 1969 was never just about science or progress. It was about connection, the invisible thread that linked every person on Earth that night as they watched a man take that first step. It was about the belief that no dream was too big, no distance too far, no difference too great. For a moment, we remembered that we were all part of something larger, a shared story, a shared sky, a shared hope. And yet, even as we touched the heavens, life on Earth went on. People still fell in love, still argued, still cooked dinner and paid bills and laughed with their children. The moon might have felt infinite, but the heart still belonged to home. That is what made it so powerful. It reminded us that greatness doesn't live in distance or technology, but in the people who dare to dream. When you think back to 1969, it's not just the rockets or the music you remember. It's the feeling. The feeling of being alive in a time when everything seemed possible. The smell of summer air, the hum of a radio, the way the world seemed to glow a little brighter. Even now, decades later, that feeling lingers, like the after-image of a flashbulb, fading slowly, but never truly gone. For those who lived through it, 1969 will always be more than history. It was youth, it was hope, it was proof that the world could change, and that people could change it. Maybe that's why it still captures our imagination, because deep down we all crave that same magic, that same unity, that same wonder, the belief that we can reach higher, do better, be more. Of course, the world moved on. The 1970s brought new challenges, new songs, new dreams. The headlines shifted, and life settled back into its rhythm. But something about 1969 stayed with us, a quiet reminder of who we were at our best. It taught us that progress doesn't have to erase humanity, and that technology means nothing without compassion. Even now, when we look up at the moon, we don't just see a rock floating in space. We see a mirror, reflecting the courage, the hope, and the heart of a world that once dared to believe in itself. And maybe in that reflection, we can still find a little of that spirit today. Because the truth is, the world will always change. It has to. But it's up to us to decide what we carry forward. 1969 gave us more than history. It gave us perspective, the understanding that even in chaos there can be beauty, that even in division there can be unity, and that sometimes the smallest step can echo through eternity. So when we think back to that year, to the music, the laughter, the courage, the light, we're not just remembering what happened, we're remembering what we became. The day the world changed wasn't only about reaching the moon, it was about reaching ourselves. And that's why 1969 will always matter. Because it reminds us that in the end, the greatest distance we'll ever cross isn't between Earth and the stars. It's between who we are and who we're still capable of becoming.